Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilvin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part 6, I think, of my Whispers of the Old Gods card reviews. Actually, a bunch of new cards have been revealed, so I'm going to take some time to run through each of them, talk about their competitive viability and just general quality, and cuteness for cards like Spawn of N'Zoth, the brand new 3-mana neutral minion that takes the cake and the crown for the cutest artwork in the game from Murloc Tinyfin. His little tentacles are so cute. Unfortunately, I don't think the minion is all that good, so we probably won't see him played all that often, even in Arena. He is just a 2-2 for 3 mana, which is a very bad stat allocation. A 2-2 is merely reasonable for a 2-drop, and it's quite below curve for a 4-drop. You're really looking for 2 4s or 3 4s at that 3 mana spot. So on raw stats, he's not going to make the cut. And he does have a powerful effect, but still I don't think it's quite good enough. His Death Rattle gives your other minions +1/+1. So whenever this little guy dies, you buff up your board. The problem is with that effect is that by turn 3, you typically probably don't have a lot of stuff on the board just yet. You've had 2 turns to accumulate minions, so very likely in the best case scenario, you've maybe got 3 minions out, and more likely you have 1 or 0. So it gives your opponent a pretty big window to deal with this over the course of a whole turn, so that the Death Rattle doesn't go off at all. It just doesn't affect anything because you don't have any minions on the board. So you're kind of putting the control of this minion's demise in your opponent's hands. So they get to dictate the timing for when it dies. Now, of course, it is possible you play this on turn 3, they don't have an answer, and then you play like a 4-drop and you sack your 3-drop into the board. But with only 2 attack, it might be an inefficient trade when you try to kill it yourself. So you'll probably try to keep it alive a little bit. But by then, again, you're giving your opponent time to deal with it on their terms. So it's just going to be awkward to ever get this effect to go off when you want. Now, it does have some potential synergy with N'Zoth himself here, if I can find the card, yeah. So this one summons your Death Rattle minions that died this game. So theoretically, you could summon your little cute N'Zoth minion, and maybe buff your entire board, but remember, when this battle cry goes off, those minions can't attack yet. You still have to wait a turn, so you're still giving the initiative and the timing to your opponent for your Spawn of N'Zoth. If it was a 2-3 or a 2-4 that had a greater likelihood to survive and let you dictate the pace, potentially it would see play, but as it stands right now, unless some other cards come out that give this additional synergy, it's unfortunately a very cute card that's probably also very bad. So let's move on to the next card. It is the opposite of a cute card. That's one of the scariest card arts Hearthstone has ever seen. It does not fit the tone and style of Hearthstone these days, but I like it. It's pretty cool. The 8-mana Boogie Monster. It's also got the cutest name in Hearthstone. The Boogie Monster is a 6/7 minion that when this attacks and kills a minion, it gains +2/+2. So this is an 8-drop, which means it's very, very slow. It is only going to be a late-game card, obviously. And it doesn't have an instant effect at all, which is usually a sign of doom for slow cards. You like them to have something that has an immediate impact on the game. And this one's really quite slow. It's got the stats of a Boulder Fist Ogre at the start. So this effect is basically costing you 2 mana in value and efficiency. And it only works when you attack and kill another minion. So let's say they've got an Emperor Thaurissan on board and you kill it with your Boogie Monster. You go down to 6/2, but then you gain 2 back, so you become a 6/4. So basically you become an 8/4, excuse me. So you kind of turned into a Ren Black Hand, right? But then the problem is anytime you kill something that's got a lot of health, typically you're going to be taking a lot of damage as well. So after this thing attacks the first time and it gains that +2 health back, it's probably going to be at 3 health, 4 health, 5 health. It's not going to go up to 9, right? if you kill a Silverhand Recruit with a 6 attack minion, yeah, sure, you'll go up to 8 health. But who cares? You got a Silverhand Recruit for 8 mana. That's not valuable, and it just gives your opponent more time to find answers and resources to deal with it. So it's kind of like a Gruul almost, and that as time passes in the game, you gain stats, and as we all know, Gruul is not a very competitive card. It's just far too slow to do anything. So best case scenario, if you want this to continue growing, you're only impacting a single minion every turn. You're never hitting face, and if you're doing that, you're giving your opponent time to dig out those answers. It's just in an awkward place. I think this one's just going to be dust. It's a cool idea and a great design and a scary piece of artwork here, but the Boogie Monster is a very subpar card. Moving on to a 3-mana Hunter spell called Infest. More spiders. Hunter just seems to love spiders. Give your minions Death Rattle. Add a random beast to your hand. So basically, Infest takes all of your minions and turns them into web spinners. Now, they don't turn into 1/1s, but it gives them the same Death Rattle as a web spinner. And web spinner is a fantastic card. We're losing it with Naxxramas. For standard format, that is. So this is kind of maybe a nice little nod to the era of web spinner returning. But this time, it combos with all the minions on board, and I actually think this card has some promise. Typically, Hunter wants faster things that do damage more quickly, and this is definitely a little bit of a slower way to spend 3 mana than, say, a Kill Command, for instance. But it's pseudo card draw in that it can help you refill your hand. Combos really nicely with Unleash the Hounds, because you might spawn 3 or 4 hounds, cast Infest, run them all into whatever you're trying to kill, and then suddenly you've got 3 or 4 extra beasts in your hand, which could be low curve efficient stuff, or Savannah Eye Mains or any other big beasts as well. So it's kind of a mid-rangey, almost control-oriented Hunter card, in that it gives you resources for the late game pretty efficiently. Drawing 4 good cards for 3 mana is incredibly valuable. So in the right scenarios and the right kinds of decks, I can see Infest being quite good. There's always spell synergies to consider as well. Things like Lock and Load and so on and so forth. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this one in action. It might give control late game hunters some more reliable and consistent card draw without some downsides. So I like Infest. We'll see. Moving on. Up next is Xaril, Poisoned Mind. It's a cool little insect guy holding some kind of flask, some green gooey stuff. It is a rogue legendary at 4 mana. It's got 3/2 in stats, as you can see, and a pretty neat battle cry and Death Rattle, much like Toshli has a battle cry and Death Rattle. And it's a very similar one, in fact. Add a random toxin card to your hand. Now, toxin cards are a new thing. Never seen toxin cards before. They're kind of like spare parts in a sense, but instead of they both cost 1 mana, but they're different effects. In fact, some of them are unique effects. And here are the toxins, which we'll just run through these real fast before we get back to kind of the overall strategy of Xaril, Poison Mind. So the first toxin is Fade Leaf Toxin. Give a friendly minion stealth until your next turn. Briar Thorn Toxin. Give a minion +3 attacks. That's way better than the equivalent spare part, even though Fade Leaf Toxin is pretty similar. Blood Thistle Toxin. Return a friendly minion to your hand, and it costs 2 less. So that's, again, an upgrade from the spare parts. And King's Blood Toxin. Draw a card. That's fantastic. 1 mana cycle card. Just so good. And Fire Bloom Toxin, deal 2 damage. So all of these toxins are fantastic for rogues. I mean, without any doubt, they're all so very good. Fade Leaf is fantastic for rogue. You can stealth your Auctioneer. Briar Thorn is extra damage. It's kind of like a Cold Blood for 1 mana extra. You got Blood Thistle Toxin, which is like Shadow Step, basically. Fantastic card. King's Blood, it's just pure card draw cycle, is fantastic, and deal 2 damage it's an unconditional backstab, right? So all of these are amazing, not to mention that all spells are good for Rogue. They have so many ways to use spells, whether these are 1-mana combo activators, whether they play off Auctioneer. It's just they can use spells incredibly well when they're cheap like these, and these all have good effects. I love these toxins. I don't know if they're going to show up in any other cards, but even if they don't, I think Xaril Poison Mind could be a pretty foundational Rogue card. I think we might see this show up in a variety of different Rogue decks. Admittedly, 3-2 in stats is not great for a 4-drop. It's pretty bad, in fact. It's very little health for a 4-drop. But rogues don't often care too bad about the quality of the minion. It's the stuff that the minion allows them to do. In other words, rogues always play overcosted minions with cool effects and weak bodies. Gadget's and Auctioneer being a perfect example, right? It's a 4/4 for 6. It's not good stats, but the effect is insane. Azure Drake's kind of the same thing. A lot of rogue minions follow that pattern. Xaril's the same way, and really you probably don't even care if he dies too easily, because that's just giving you your next toxin card, right? And getting 2 toxin cards out of this guy could set up some big plays in future turns. And like I said, without fail, these are all fantastic effects. I mean, you probably want King's Blood a lot. There will be times where you want Fire Bloom a lot, and it's going to be random, so you'll be happy sometimes and sad the other times, but all of them are going to have ways to be useful in some scenarios. So you won't feel like you ever really just got totally gypped on one of these. I love Xaril the Poison Mind. Pretty exciting rogue card to me. It's gonna add some new life and some new fun to the class for sure. And then finally, our last card for this particular video might be the worst card in the entire Whispers of the Old Gods set. It is a warrior weapon, 5 mana. It has the coolest name in the history of Hearthstone, that's for sure. Tentacles for arms. That is awesome. To call that a weapon at all is amazing. And you can note, if you look at the artwork here, these are huge tentacles, because I think this is like a tree. And these appear to be coming out of the clouds, right? So I don't know why these giant, just stratospherically huge tentacles only do 2 damage, but apparently they do. Tentacles for arms, 5 mana weapon. So remember, that's competing directly with Arcanite Reaper, which is a 5/2, and this is a 2/2. Okay, so you're losing 3 attack per durability, so 6 total damage is lost. Tentacles for arms over Arcanite Reaper. But it has a death rattle. Return this card or this weapon to your hand when it expires. So basically you can get infinite weapon charges out of Tentacles for arms, but every time you do it, it's going to cost you 5 mana. Now, infinite stuff like this is pretty cool. It was compared to the rogue card Headcrack by Hearthstone game designer Ben Brode, and he said, you know, Headcrack is not very good at 3 mana, but it used to be 2 mana, and that was considered overpowered. So we designed Tentacles for arms with a similar kind of mentality. You can do 2 damage every turn, basically forever, at the cost of about 2.5 mana per turn, because it's 5 mana divided by 2 durability, right? So every other turn you can spend 5 mana and get 4 total damage. And that was the comparison that Ben Brode made, and it's a fair comparison at some level, because he's considering a damage to mana ratio and figuring out where the math seems to be balanced at. But the thing he's not considering is a mana flexibility standpoint. In other words, it's very hard to find places to spend 5 mana when it doesn't hamper your turn in some other way. Whereas with a 2 mana Headcrack, you can slot that in all the time, because you're always going to have 2 or 3 or even 4 spare mana at the end of a late game turn. 3 mana Headcrack's a little harder to find room, and that's one of the reasons it never sees play. And a 5 mana Tentacles for arm is really committal when it comes to mana expenditure. You have to spend half of your turn on this card, and the impact of it is not immediate. In the late game, doing 2 damage, it's probably not going to make an impact on their face. In other words, you're not going to be killing them with 2 damage often. It's hard to use against minions because most stuff at that point is going to have way more than 2 health. You can hero power as well, but that leaves you with 3 mana, so it's hard to play a minion and hero power. So many things about this card just make it feel awkward from a mana standpoint. Yeah, it's coming back to your hand, but then you still have to spend 5 mana, which is painful. I think the mentality with this design was that warriors like to last into the late game and play towards fatigue, and giving them a card that gives them infinite resources in fatigue basically turns this into like a hunter hero power where they're just doing 2 damage every single turn. And I think that's okay. It's an okay way to think about the card. But the problem is that it's taking up a weapon slot in your deck as well. In other words, you can't just put infinite cards in your deck. You have to pick one that's better than the other that's going to matter in the right moments. And this one only matters at the very, 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 very end of the game. And by that point, it's been sitting in your hand wasting time, or you've had to use it and waste mana, and it's hampering you along the way. It's making you lose all the way to fatigue. So the risk-reward is very skewed toward risk with this card in my mind. I think it's far more punishing than it would ever be rewarding. And I'd almost rather run an Arcanite Reaper in any situations. Not to mention this is an epic quality card, so you're going to be pretty sad, I think, when you draw this in a pack instead of another high-quality epic. That said, you will get some dust for disenchanting this if you're so inclined, but I hope this doesn't trap anyone into crafting this card just because the artwork is so cool and the name is so funny. That said, I hope I'm totally wrong. I hope there's some new cards that like draw weapons for free. There's some crazy Blingtron action with this card in wild format. I'm sure we'll see some shenanigans with this thing. And I hope that's the case. I hope I'm wrong. I hope this turns out to be amazing because it's just got such a good fantasy and good lore and a great name and artwork that I hate to see it go to waste. But as I see it, Tentacles for Arms is maybe the worst card in Whispers of the Old Gods yet. So that'll do it for part 6 of my Whispers of the Old Gods card review. If you have any questions about these cards or you think I'm totally crazy and got it all wrong, just let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to hear your thoughts. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, game on.